I think because I read so broadly and I consume, outside of crime and I read a lot of literary fiction and that kind of thing as well. The idea of kind of character study really stands out to me. And I often find when I'm writing in a series, there's a lot of reader expectation because you're very much in a well-hewn genre. If you're writing a police procedural series like the Jamie series or a kind of military action, thriller series like the Church series, there are very like specific expected beats that the reader wants you to hit that you need to hit because otherwise you're not in that genre anymore, and while that's rewarding to get the opportunity to like tell a story within a sandbox, it gives you a lot of freedom to play within that sandbox. But then when you get to write a standalone, you just think, well, all of the like rules that bind me in that series, that like Solomon Church has to come out and he has to win at the end, he has to beat the bad guys, and you have to have that villain and the clear good guy and the bad guy, and you have to have those kind of tent poles. When it comes to a standalone, you can kind of just do whatever you want. So for me, it's a real breath of fresh air that I can delve into those realms of like experimentation, and I can make them more character focused and more kind of conceptually elaborate, and I can play with kind of chronology and do all the things that like I studied when I was in university, and I was reading a lot of modernist and postmodernist kind of fiction. And I think like I love crime and I'm telling crime stories, but like how can I bring in these other sort of storytelling elements and make this story not that people just have to kind of hold on to with their fingernails as it rushes forward, but something that people can kind of dig into and think about, and I don't have to necessarily play by the rules, and I can make an ending that doesn't really make everybody happy, that isn't a happily ever after. And I just really enjoy kind of doing that as a as a as an experiment, really, to sort of try to push my boundaries and try to see whether or not I can do something different and push myself. Jacob Taylor is an everyman. I think is the most fun thing, is that Jamie and Solomon Church, they're very like borderline superheroes. They are unstoppable forces that are going to ferret out evil and ultimately destroy it by the last page. And then like everything goes back to normal. By the start of the next book. Whereas Jacob Taylor is a an average guy, an average man who's just living his life and not doing a great job of it, who gets swept up in this kind of like tale of intrigue. And one of my favorite things to experiment with is kind of pushing normal characters to do things that would break them. Like Solomon Church has no problem like taking out his gun and like shooting somebody that needs to be shot when they need to be shot. But when you have somebody like Jacob Taylor, who's just he fixes farm equipment for his job, so it's like when he's got a gun in his hand, it's a very, very different thing for him, and a very different set of thought processes, and a very different sort of set of stakes, because Solomon Church acts without thinking about what the consequence is. But a guy like Jacob Taylor is like, well, if I do shoot somebody, or if I do commit this crime, that there is this very real consequence, that I'm going to go to prison, or I'm going to face kind of justice. And I think that you know getting to work with a character that isn't, who is afraid of the consequences of his actions, just really, gives a crime story much more of a, I guess, stakes, a risk and reward sort of idea that when he does the right thing, even if it's illegal, he has to really weigh the cost of that in a way that kind of maybe the serialized or superhero characters don't.